This week we're going to talk about Wes Anderson. I mean, I just saw Isle of Dogs, so that should be fun. But I mean, it should be a really fun episode. Hopefully people like it. I'm not really sure. But if they don't like it, well, I mean, there's other things in the world that they could like.
Hello and welcome to another episode of On Screen. I'm your host Dylan Wright, and I'm here to take you on a journey through film and television. So in honor of Wes Anderson coming out with his latest movie, Isle of Dogs, it just hit wide release last weekend. I thought I would talk about the works of this auteur director, this quirky man, Wes Anderson. If you haven't seen a Wes Anderson film before, you can definitely tell immediately that this is a film by a person who doesn't quite think the way that everybody else thinks. A lot of the setup and a lot of the angles are a little different than what we're used to in terms of regular film. A lot of flat landscapes, a lot of symmetry, and a lot of pastel colors, a lot of bright and poppy colors that kind of clashes at times with some of the really dark story at sometimes, especially in like the Royal Tenenbaums. There's a really dark part of that movie that you never really see coming. There's some really dark parts in Moonrise Kingdom that come out of nowhere, but it still has this almost childlike fairy tale atmosphere to it, like you're reading an old picture book from the 60s or like a classic children's novel that displays adventures of these different people. But Wes Anderson definitely has a unique vision in terms of how he puts a film together. And especially with the actors, a lot of the acting could be considered underdoing it. They're very subdued performances from a lot of really big names. Like from the start of his career, Bottle Rocket, he had the Wilson brothers, Luke and Owen Wilson, because he was friends with Owen Wilson. And he would collaborate with them quite often. And then the second movie, he managed to get Bill Murray, of all people, into that movie, Rushmore. And it's funny because Bill Murray's been known to be kind of a fickle actor. He has a really weird system for accepting jobs, something involving leaving a message on a voicemail box. And if he gets back to you, then you might have a movie. But Wes Anderson was on a lark throwing it out there, hey, we should get Bill Murray to be in this role. And he accepted. And Wes Anderson, the second-time director in doing his second movie, was a little afraid of Mr. Murray, as you would be. Bill Murray is kind of an eccentric guy. And he would whisper his directions to Bill Murray on the set of Rushmore because he didn't want to be embarrassed if Bill Murray outright told him he was an idiot or refused to do something. But apparently he really respected Anderson. He thought that the man was really smart, and he went for a really low paycheck. He did the movie for, I believe, just like SAG minimum, which is crazy because Bill Murray at that point in the 90s, he was the star. He was huge. Groundhog Day, Ghostbusters, all these movies came out. And he was helping out this second-time director do this movie. And it's a good movie, Rushmore. It also has the real debut performance kind of Jason Schwartzman as as Max, and it's a really interesting kind of role. It's this character that he thinks he's full of himself, but you're still finding something to like about him. He's in all these extracurricular clubs at this school, and the principal's like, your grades are terrible. And Max is like, well, if I have to stay and after a postgraduate year, I will. And the professor's like, this is a high school. We don't offer postgraduate years. So this character is a little precocious, and much like most of the characters in Wes Anderson movies. And he almost informed the characters afterwards. Characters like Susie in Moonrise Kingdom that are a little, they're on a different wavelength than most of the other people in the world. And you could tell that there's something special about them. And even the movie The Royal Tenenbaums, his next movie, he managed to get Gene Hackman, Ben Stiller, Gwyneth Paltrow, Danny Glover. Every one of these actors so prolific and big in their own name. And it's a movie that really resonates in that it's about these child prodigies and what happens after they get out of childhood. Where do they go from there? How do they keep going with their genius, or do they flounder? And it's a really interesting look at family and especially fatherhood, which is a really recurring theme in Wes Anderson movies. An absent father, or a father that the protagonist is ashamed of. Like in Rushmore, Max's father, he is a barber, and Max is a little underwhelmed by that, and he doesn't tell people that his father's a barber. And in Royal Tenenbaums, the title character, Royal Tenenbaum, has to pretend that he's dying in order for his children to come together and be with him. It's really interesting, the themes that pop up in Wes Anderson movies, and that's definitely one of the main ones that happens. Really, all of his movies have something unique to offer. There's something that is really interesting about every one of them, even if maybe the plot's a little too slow. And that's something that a lot of people will say about Wes Anderson, is that it takes a little bit to get into it. It's a little stagnant in terms of movement and whatnot. And I'll be honest, the first time I watched a Wes Anderson movie, I fell asleep because it was such a still movie and not too much action happens all at once. It's very much more about the characters and the set pieces. That not so much for his later movies. Grand Budapest Hotel has some pretty good action in it. Isle of Dogs, his latest, has some action as well. And it's really jarring when you see these stagnant pieces, and then all of a sudden these action parts where guns are being shot and dogs are attacking each other. It's jarring, and I think it's meant to be, and it's done really well. And a lot of what Wes Anderson does is he makes you think about these situations and elevates them to a level that you're not quite comfortable, because it seems like the real world. A lot of these movies seem like they take place in modern times, but there's these anachronistic parts to the movies, like older type telephones or different types of cars, or the aesthetic is a little bit 60s, that throws you off, and it keeps you aloof. And I think the performances as well help to add to that. Like a movie like Grand Budapest Hotel, you're following this journey of this bellhop, this concierge who's running this hotel, and you're feeling, okay, I know this takes place around World War II, but it's still a little bit of almost like a storybook retelling, whereas it's not like a gritty, dark retelling of World War II. There's a lot of bright colors and a lot of miniatures. Like the hotel itself is basically a miniature, and it looks like it's part of a train set almost. And it's really interesting to see. They're like toys almost. And Wes Anderson is using these actors and these sets as toys, and he's playing with them and making them do things. And it's interesting. It's definitely a different style of filmmaking, because you're usually used to seeing these emotive performances, these expressive acting jobs where the actor really gets into the role and it really makes you feel for it. But there's almost a restraint to a lot of these performances. There's almost a self-awareness where a lot of lines are doled back to the point where you're like, does this person actually feel anything, or are they just saying these lines because they feel they need to? And it's really interesting to try and parse through that. One of the movies that I think maybe falls flat in Wes Anderson's filmography is maybe The Darjeeling Limited. It's a really nice trip through India and a nice exploration of this different culture, but I don't think it quite knows what it's trying to be. This plot's a little scattered. The performances are good, but I just think that it's probably the weakest of his movies, along with Life Aquatic of Steve Zissou. But that movie has a much better piece in my mind, because it has some Portuguese covers of David Bowie songs done by Sue George that are just amazing. So I give that movie a bit of a pass for that. And music is really another big thing in the Wes Anderson movies. There's a lot of really nice songs and soundtrack choices that are really different. They they have this jaunty feel to them, and it's something that a lot of directors usually don't go for. But it goes perfectly with his movies. There's just this chipper feeling to it, and you look at these movies and you think, oh, this is like a really happy, almost to the point of neurotic director, but there's a lot of dark stuff in it and a lot of down and depressing bits to it as well. So it's almost like the pastels and the music hide this veneer of cynicism or this sadness underneath it all. And it's really powerful to see and to parse out what the director is trying to do. So definitely check out a Wes Anderson film if you've never seen one before. I will warn you, it's very different from any other kind of film that you're used to. It's not a typical film, especially Isle of Dogs. If you're going into Isle of Dogs cold, you're going to be a little weirded out. I would definitely suggest maybe watching Royal Tenenbaums first if you want to get into him. Maybe Rushmore. Moonrise Kingdom and Grand Budapest Hotel are also two really good movies to start out on the Wes Anderson catalog. He's an acquired taste, I think, but definitely one that makes an impact after you acquire it. So that's going to be it for this week's episode of On Screen. If you have any future suggestions for any topics, I would love to cover anything that you'd like me to cover. And as always, until next time, take care.